Bathing once a year. You picture the medieval town at dusk, its crooked streets quiet except for the soft bleating of goats being brought in from pasture, the distant toll of a church bell summoning a handful of worshippers, and the trickle of water down a wooden trough. There is water here, yes, drawn up from wells or flowing down streams that snake past cottages, but water is not seen as something to immerse in often. In fact, to step into a bath is an act reserved for rare occasions, carried out with a sense of ceremony, suspicion, or even dread. People of these centuries believed that the body's pores, once opened by warm water, became doorways through which disease could easily enter. To cleanse too frequently was to invite illness, and so it became common habit to live with the layers of dust, smoke, and sweat that gathered day after day. One bath in the depth of winter, or perhaps on a holy day of importance, was thought sufficient for an entire year. And if you stand quietly in this imagined village, you can almost smell the mingling aromas of hearth smoke, damp wool, and bodies unwashed since the last feast day. The practice of bathing was not entirely forgotten, of course, for the medieval world still carried echoes of Rome's grand bathhouses. In monasteries, in the courts of kings, and in wealthy towns, bathhouses did exist. They were modest wooden rooms or stone halls where tubs might be filled, heated by a fire beneath, and shared by men or women in turn. Yet for most villagers and farmers, such luxuries were out of reach. Instead, a wooden bucket filled with well water might serve for splashing the face and hands, while the rest of the body went untouched. To rub the skin with linen or to scrape it with a small knife was often thought as good as bathing, and many households considered a change of clothes if one possessed more than a single tunic equal to a full wash. In that age, washing garments was sometimes regarded as more cleansing to the person than bathing the skin itself, for clothes carried odors and dirt just as bodies did. Even in towns where public baths were established, suspicion grew around them. Authorities sometimes shut them down during outbreaks of plague, fearful that the mingling of steam and sweat would carry pestilence between bathers. Priests preached sermons warning that too much comfort for the flesh led to weakness of the spirit, and so abstinence from bathing became entangled with piety. Yet there were also other voices, gentler ones, who spoke of water as a gift, as cleansing both to body and soul. In certain monasteries, the act of washing the feet of guests became a sacred duty, echoing Christ's humility. But such rituals were symbolic. A splash of water here, a damp cloth passed there, not the immersion one might imagine when thinking of a bath today. If you wandered through a castle on the day appointed for bathing, you might find servants carrying in heavy wooden tubs, lining them with cloth to protect against splinters, and filling them with buckets of water drawn from the kitchen hearth. Nobles would disrobe carefully, step into the steaming bath, and perhaps have herbs like rosemary or lavender strewn upon the surface to mask odors and to please the senses. This bath would be an event, often followed by the changing into freshly laundered garments, hair combed, perfumes or pomanders pressed to the skin. For the lord or lady of the castle, this ceremony could last hours, with attendants standing nearby to ladle warm water over shoulders or to scrub gently with cloths. Children might be brought in after, splashing happily, though in cooler water by then, for heating great quantities was laborious. For the peasants outside these walls, such extravagance was a tale heard second-hand, something to marvel at. Their bathing was seasonal, when rivers ran full in spring, or when midsummer festivals encouraged merriment. Then, boys and men might plunge into rivers with laughter, while women washed their arms and faces discreetly at the banks. But the cold months discouraged such plunges, and with each passing day of winter, the grime of living soot from fires, sweat from labor, dust from threshing fields settled deeper. It was ordinary, accepted, and scarcely noticed. To the medieval nose, accustomed as it was, the mingling of human odors was no more remarkable than the scent of tilled earth or smoke in the air. There were, too, strange remedies for odor, ways of disguising the lack of bathing. People carried small pouches filled with herbs or spices, tied at the waist or hidden in sleeves. These pomanders were sniffed discreetly when foul smells pressed too near. Nobles sometimes wore carved balls of metal or wood, filled with musk, ambergris, or cloves, swinging from chains at their sides, and if washing the body was rare, washing the hands was constant. Before and after meals, a basin was brought round, and guests rinsed their fingers in perfumed water, often sprinkled with rose petals. This, more than anything, kept the illusion of cleanliness. The face, too, might be dabbed with a damp cloth each morning, though it was more about awakening than scrubbing away dirt. In certain towns, bathhouses even doubled as places of amusement. Chronicles from medieval Germany describe bathhouses with music, food, and merriment, where tubs were shared by several people at once. Yet such places gained reputations less wholesome, and whispers of sin and indulgence clung to them. Over time, the association of baths with moral decay grew stronger, and the noble classes began to avoid them. Washing at home, in privacy, became more acceptable, though still rare. Thus, the custom of bathing once a year endured for generations, woven into the rhythm of life and justified by belief, necessity, and fear alike. As you linger in this imagined past, you can almost feel the texture of wool garments worn day after day without washing, the weight of hair uncut and uncleaned, the scent of herbs clutched in a pouch to mask the air, and the hush of a household when the great wooden tub was finally filled on the one night when water, heat, and courage all came together for a proper bath. It is a slow, unhurried rhythm, one of acceptance of the body as it is, unwashed, enduring, and wrapped in layers of belief. Tooth care with ashen wine. If you look closely at the faces of villagers in the Middle Ages, you might notice their smiles are not gleaming white but worn, uneven, sometimes broken. The care of teeth, though never absent from their minds, was not pursued with the polish and precision you know today. Instead, it unfolded in ways both curious and strange, drawing on what could be found at hand: ashes from the hearth, salt scraped from barrels, the sharp sting of wine or vinegar. To clean one's teeth was not a daily ritual, but rather a practical act, done when food debris irritated the gums or when breath grew too sour for the company of others. In that age, the mouth was considered a mirror of one's humours, and the mixture of liquids and powders was meant to balance the body as much as to scrub the enamel. Charcoal and ash were most common, gathered from the fire that warmed the home. A pinch was rubbed directly onto the teeth with a cloth, or with the finger itself, the dark dust scratching against enamel, scraping away food particles. Sometimes salt was mixed with ash, creating a coarse texture that worked much like sandpaper. The sensation must have been unpleasant, the taste bitter, yet people believed this abrasion kept the teeth sound. Herbs were also favoured: sage leaves crushed into paste, mint for its cooling sharpness, fennel seeds chewed until they released their oils. Each of these left a lingering flavour in the mouth, a reminder that something had been done, a kind of reassurance in a world without shining mirrors or dental surgeons. Wine, too, held its place in the care of teeth. It was more than a drink. It was a cleanser. Rinsing the mouth with wine was thought to purify it, for the strong liquid washed away food remnants and left behind the sweetness of grape. Vinegar might serve the same purpose, though its sting on the gums could bring tears to the eyes. In some households, women prepared special mixtures: wine mixed with herbs like rosemary or thyme, boiled briefly, then cooled, becoming a rinse to be swished through the teeth after heavy meals. A knight returning from a feast of roasted meat and coarse bread might thus end his night with a rinse, believing he was doing his health a favour. Yet for all these efforts, toothaches haunted people constantly. Without dentists, remedies were desperate. A charm might be whispered over the aching jaw, invoking saints thought to guard against pain. In other cases, a village healer would place a heated iron nail against the cheek to draw out the bad humour, or recommend chewing on cloves to numb the flesh. Garlic, onion, and even ground bone were all pressed into service as cures. When pain grew unbearable, the only solution was extraction, performed with crude iron tools, often by the local barber who doubled as surgeon. In a world where infection was scarcely understood, the pulling of a tooth was a terrifying ordeal, but one faced by countless villagers across generations. Despite the hardships, people cared about the appearance of their smiles. Chronicles tell of nobles who polished their teeth with cloth dipped in wine, of ladies who chewed aromatic herbs to keep their breath sweet in the hall. The importance of breath is mentioned often, for gatherings were intimate. People sat close at tables or slept side by side, and foul breath could make one unwelcome. Thus, small pouches filled with anise or cloves were carried, their contents chewed discreetly when conversation drew near. Perfumed waters, distilled from roses or violets, were sometimes dabbed onto the lips, more for fragrance than hygiene, but still part of the ritual of care. Superstition wrapped itself around the teeth as well. Some believed worms caused decay, tiny creatures that burrowed inside enamel to hollow it out. To chase them away, healers offered strange remedies, holding a candle near the tooth to smoke out the worms, or chanting charms while sprinkling holy water into the mouth. Others swore by touching a tooth with the bone of a saint or carrying a talisman engraved with prayers. Children were taught to rub their first loose teeth with salt, believing it would help new ones grow stronger. In this mixture of faith, medicine, and fear, the mouth became a battlefield of small, daily struggles. In towns, apothecaries sometimes sold powders for teeth. These might be made from ground oyster shells, burnt bone, or crushed herbs, carefully wrapped in paper and kept for special use. The wealthy could afford these concoctions, sprinkling the powder on a cloth and rubbing it across the teeth before feasts. To present a cleaner smile was to show refinement, to distinguish oneself from the peasantry whose teeth bore the stains of ale and coarse bread. Yet even nobles rarely escaped decay, and written accounts describe kings and queens suffering long years of pain, relying on prayers, poultices, and eventually the crude hands of a barber surgeon. When you imagine this world, you see a candlelit room, a woman sitting near the hearth with a small bowl of ash, dipping her finger into it, rubbing her teeth slowly, methodically, while her children watch and mimic. The fire crackles, the air smells of smoke, and the bitterness of ash fills her mouth, but she smiles faintly, knowing she has done her part to keep illness at bay. Across the town, a merchant swishes a mouthful of wine after his evening meal, spitting it into the straw at his feet, his breath now tinged with grape. These quiet, simple acts, repeated by countless others, formed the strange, forgotten routines of tooth care in the Middle Ages. And so, in this dim world of flickering lamps and herbal scents, teeth were not ignored but tended in ways both harsh and tender, with ash and salt, wine and herbs, prayers and charms, each act a small defense against decay, each ritual a reminder of how people once lived, accepting pain yet striving, in their own peculiar fashion, for health and dignity. Sleeping in 2 shifts. When night falls in the medieval world, it is not banished by lamplight as in modern times, but allowed to descend fully, thick and encompassing, wrapping villages and cities alike in a cloak of stillness. Candles and rushlights flicker faintly, hearths glow with dying embers, and beyond their small halos of light, darkness reigns. In this deeper night, sleep comes differently. People do not lie down for one long, unbroken rest, but instead surrender to slumber in 2 distinct parts, the first sleep and the second sleep, with a wakeful interval lying quietly in between. This pattern, natural to bodies unaccustomed to artificial light, stretches across the centuries like an invisible rhythm, shaping lives in ways both strange and gentle. As the day's labor ends, the peasant lies upon his straw mattress, drawing a coarse woolen blanket over himself and his family. The air is filled with the mingling of human warmth and the earthy scent of livestock housed close by for safety. Sleep comes quickly after exhaustion, and the first slumber begins. It is deep, heavy, carrying the body away into rest. For 4 or 5 hours this first sleep continues, until at last some unseen stirring wakes the household. Eyes open, not with alarm, but with quiet acceptance, for this waking is expected, natural. They rise for a little while, speaking softly, praying, tending to small tasks. In castles, the scene is much the same though, set against richer surroundings. Nobles recline upon beds layered with linen sheets, pillows stuffed with feathers, and thick furs piled against the chill. They too close their eyes in early evening, lulled by silence, and sleep until midnight. At that hour, servants stir quietly through the halls, rekindling fires, fetching jugs of wine or warm broth for their lords. In this hushed interval between first and second sleep, People read, if they are able, by candlelight. They whisper to one another. They step outside to gaze at the stars. Monks, rising for their midnight prayers, chant in stone cloisters, their voices echoing through the dark as the great cycle of devotion continues. This period of wakefulness was not wasted time, but precious space. Some couples drew close in intimacy, believing the hours after first sleep were especially fertile. Others used the quiet to pray more deeply, convinced that the veil between the earthly and the divine grew thinner in those hours. Villagers might rise to stoke the fire, to check on animals, or to share stories before lying down again. Children, roused by the shifting of their parents, would murmur drowsily before drifting back into slumber. The darkness seemed gentler then, not oppressive, but protective, encouraging thought and reflection. After this interlude, lasting perhaps an hour or two, came the second sleep. Bodies returned to their pallets, minds now calmer, freer of the day's worries, and rest resumed until dawn. This second slumber was lighter, often filled with dreams, and when morning light began to creep through shutters, people awoke refreshed. To them, two sleeps were not unusual or remarkable, but simply the way of life. Chronicles, diaries, and even legal records mention the first sleep and the second sleep, as though all knew these words without explanation. The pattern shaped daily rhythm in subtle ways. Markets opened later in the morning, for no one expected the town to stir early after the second sleep. Prayers at midnight became customary in monasteries, aligning devotion with the natural waking. In homes, tasks like mending clothes or preparing dough for bread were often done in the interval, the quiet hours between sleeps lending themselves to small labours. The darkness of the world, unbroken by electric light, carved this pattern into every household, rich or poor, devout or worldly. Imagine yourself lying in a narrow bed, a rough blanket pulled up against the cold, the scent of smoke lingering in your hair. Around midnight, your eyes open softly, not startled but calmly aware. You hear the crackle of the hearth as someone stirs it back to life, the shuffle of a neighbour's feet on the floor above, the faint sound of a cock crowing too early. You sit up, perhaps sip from a wooden cup of ale left nearby, and murmur a prayer. For a little while, the night belongs to you, a moment of stillness in a world always rushing. Then, as drowsiness returns, you lie down again, surrendering to the gentler embrace of the second sleep, drifting into dreams until the first pale light of dawn touches the world outside. In this rhythm of slumber, unhurried and divided, the people of the Middle Ages lived closer to the natural order of night and day. Their two sleeps, broken by moments of quiet wakefulness, remind you of a time when darkness was not an enemy to be banished, but a companion to be embraced, a guide leading gently through the long hours until morning came once again. Dining without forks. When the evening meal is prepared in the medieval world, the household gathers not around shining silverware, but around the long wooden table, spread with trenchers of bread and bowls of steaming stew. The clatter you hear is not the polite chime of forks against plates, but the sharper scrape of knives, the slosh of ladles, and above all, the soft tearing of bread and the rustle of hands reaching across the table. Forks, though known in some distant lands, have not yet taken their place in these halls. Instead, men and women eat with fingers, spoons, and knives, sharing dishes with one another in a communal fashion that is both intimate and practical. The table is set simply. For the poor, a coarse loaf of bread is split open to serve as both plate and food, the trencher absorbing juices and gravies until it softens, to be eaten at the end or thrown to animals. For the wealthy, trenchers might be made of fine white bread, replaced often during the meal, or carved wooden boards washed and reused. Bowls of pottage, thick soups of grains, peas, or vegetables are placed in the centre, from which each guest dips with their spoon, passing it back and forth without hesitation. A spoon, often of wood or pewter, is perhaps the most common tool, simple yet sufficient for the soft foods that dominate the medieval diet. Knives are essential, carried by nearly every man and woman as part of daily dress. When meat is served, it is cut directly from the joint with these personal blades, sometimes shared with a companion, sometimes used alone. A noble might be served slices already carved by the steward, while peasants carve from the pot as best they can. With the knife, chunks of food are speared, lifted, or carried to the mouth, fingers assisting where needed. Etiquette books of the time caution guests not to lick their knives too obviously, nor to place too much in their mouths at once. Reminders that even in a world of shared eating, manners mattered. To modern eyes, the absence of forks seems curious, yet in medieval thought, the hand was perfectly suited for eating. Fingers were tools given by God, and to refuse their use seemed unnecessary, even wasteful. Guests were expected to wash their hands before and after meals, with servants bringing around basins of water, often perfumed with herbs. Cleanliness of hands was a mark of civility, and dipping into communal bowls with unwashed fingers would have been frowned upon. Thus, though eating with fingers might seem disorderly, it was governed by a quiet code of respect. The fork was not unknown. In Byzantium and the Middle East, elegant forks with two slender prongs were used for delicate morsels. When such utensils reached Europe, however, they were regarded with suspicion, even disdain. Chronicles tell of nobles scoffing at their use, calling them unnecessary affectations. Some even claimed they were unholy, that God had given humans fingers for eating, and to use anything else was an insult. And so, for centuries, forks remained curiosities, confined to a few wealthy courts, never spreading into daily life. Meals themselves were hearty, often requiring no delicate implements. Bread, cheese, roasted meat, stews of beans and cabbage, all could be handled by spoon, knife, and hand. Even at great feasts, where dozens of dishes were laid before lords and ladies, the method remained the same: dipping, cutting, tearing, sharing. At such banquets, entertainment filled the gaps between courses, minstrels singing, jesters playing, while servants carried in platters of swan, peacock, or venison. Guests carved, shared, and savoured, wiping hands on cloths or even on bread crusts, and laughing at stories told across the table. Imagine sitting at such a meal, the flickering of candles lighting the hall, the scent of roasted meat mingling with smoke, the sound of voices echoing off stone walls. Beside you, a neighbour tears off a piece of bread and dips it into the thick pottage, offering you the trencher when he is done. You reach into the dish with your spoon, careful not to spill, and pass it along to the next. A servant brings a joint of meat, and you draw your knife, cutting a slice, steadying it with your fingers. The warmth of the food lingers on your hand as you bring it to your lips. There is no distance here, no separation by layers of polished silver. Instead, there is a closeness, a sharing, a rhythm of hands and voices moving together. Over time, etiquette softened the roughness of this style. Guests were taught not to plunge fingers too deep into sauce, not to choose the choicest morsels greedily, not to lick their lips too noisily. Manners became a way of distinguishing nobility from common folk, even if both used the same tools. But still, the fork lingered at the edges, waiting for centuries before it would finally be accepted. For now, in this medieval world, fingers, knives, and spoons remain the only companions at table, and the act of dining is both practical and communal, a ritual that binds families and neighbours together by touch as much as by taste. And as the meal ends, hands are washed once more, trenchers discarded, spoons tucked back into belts or pouches, knives sheathed at the side. The hall grows quieter, candles burn lower, and the memory of the shared table remains a place where food and fellowship were never divided by shining forks, but joined by the humble hand. Candles made of animal fat. As night stretches across the medieval world, shadows gather thickly in corners, pressing against doorways and shutters, seeping into every gap between stone and timber. To fight this darkness, people do not summon bright, steady flames of glass-covered lamps or smooth beeswax tapers, for such things are costly and reserved for churches or the very wealthy. Instead, the glow that fills cottages and even many manor halls comes from tallow candles, made from the rendered fat of sheep, cattle, or pigs. Their light is pale and wavering, their smell heavy and acrid, carrying with it the unmistakable trace of the slaughterhouse. And yet, to medieval eyes, this smoky glow is comforting, a fragile barrier against the immensity of night. The making of tallow candles is itself a humble, everyday craft. After animals are butchered for food, their fat is collected, boiled slowly until it renders into a greasy liquid, then cooled and purified as best as possible. This tallow is poured again and again over a wick, often made of twisted flax or hemp, until a taper forms. Sometimes a simple mold is used, though hand dipping is more common. Children may be set to the task of dipping wicks into steaming pots, lifting them out, letting them cool, and dipping once more, until a thick, uneven candle emerges. The smell of hot fat fills the air, clinging to clothes and hair, yet the work is necessary, for without these candles, nights would be near impassable. Once lit, a tallow candle burns unevenly. The flame sputters, smokes, and sometimes gutters out, needing to be trimmed with small scissors called snuffers. Its wax drips messily, leaving hardened clumps along tables and floors. The smell is strong, a mixture of burning grease and singed wick, so that even as it lights a room, it fills it with heaviness. In poor cottages, 1 or 2 candles may be all that is lit, casting just enough glow for a family to gather near the hearth. Children squint as they play with bits of wood. Women mend garments by the faint flicker. Men sharpen tools or tell stories, their faces half in shadow. In monasteries, rows of tallow candles illuminate stone chapels, their smoke rising in curling threads to stain the ceiling dark. The monks chant their offices by this light, unbothered by the smell, their minds fixed on devotion. In castles, even lords rely on tallow for most daily needs, saving beeswax only for chapels or grand ceremonies. The sweet, clean flame of beeswax is admired by all, but its price is too dear to waste. Thus, the smoky light of tallow remains the true companion of medieval nights, filling the air with its greasy perfume. Alongside candles, rushlights are common, even cheaper than tallow tapers. These are made by dipping dried rushes in fat, leaving them thin and brittle, burning quickly and unevenly. A rushlight might last only 15 minutes, needing to be replaced often, yet it offers a flicker of light for the poorest families. Imagine a mother in a dark cottage, placing a rushlight in an iron holder, lighting it carefully, and then bending over her sewing as the flame wavers dangerously, threatening to vanish at any moment. The air grows smoky, but she works quickly, knowing the light will not last long. Superstitions cling to candles as well. To let a candle burn too low is unlucky, a sign of approaching death. If the flame sputters suddenly, people whisper that spirits are near. Candles are carried in processions, used to bless homes, or placed at the bedside of the dying, their light guiding souls into the next world. Children watch their shadows leap upon the wall, imagining stories in the flickering shapes, while elders remind them to respect the flame, for it is both sacred and dangerous. Fire spreads easily in timber houses, and one fallen candle can bring ruin. Thus, the lighting and snuffing of candles is done with care, a ritual of both necessity and caution. And so, as you picture this world, you see cottages dimly lit, halls glowing faintly with wavering flames, and the air thick with the smell of burning fat. The light is not bright enough to banish the night, but only to soften it, to hold it at bay for a little while. The candle burns low, wax pooling at its base, the flame bending as a draught slips through a crack in the wall. Around it, a family leans close together, their voices hushed, their faces drawn toward that fragile circle of light. This is the medieval night, lit not by brilliance but by stubborn, smoky glow, a reminder that even in darkness, people found ways to endure, guided by the humble flame of animal fat. Shoes with ridiculously long toes. When you step into the bustling streets of a medieval town, your eyes are drawn not only to the clamour of merchants and the scent of fresh bread, but also to the curious shapes of footwear peeking from beneath long tunics and gowns. For there, stretched far beyond the natural line of the foot, you see shoes ending in narrow, curling points absurdly long, delicate toes, sometimes extending half a foot, sometimes so exaggerated that they must be tied upward with chains to the knee. These are polanes, or Krakows as some call them, named after the city of Krakow in distant Poland, from which the style was said to have travelled westward. In their strangeness they seem impractical, yet they are worn with pride, for they are not merely shoes but symbols of fashion, status, and identity in the late Middle Ages. The common man, of course, cannot afford such extravagance. His shoes are plain, sturdy, leather, stitched thick to withstand mud and stone. But among the nobility, poulaines become a matter of competition, a way of measuring wealth and daring. The longer the toe, the more distinguished the wearer appears, though it means walking becomes a careful, almost gliding affair. Shoes with toes a full 18 inches long are recorded in chronicles, their ends stuffed with moss or horsehair to keep them rigid. Some lords fasten the tips with golden chains to prevent them from dragging. You imagine the awkward elegance of such steps, nobles pacing slowly through banquet halls, the pointed ends bobbing as they walk, admired by some, mocked quietly by others. Not everyone approves of this fashion. Priests thunder from pulpits, calling such shoes a sign of vanity, a foolish waste of leather that should serve more practical needs. In some regions, sumptuary laws are issued, restricting the length of shoe points by rank. A knight may wear toes of 6 inches, a nobleman of 12, but peasants are forbidden such excess entirely. Yet the laws are rarely obeyed, for fashion has its own power, and the young delight in defying rules by stretching their toes as long as possible. Court poets and satirists mock the trend, comparing wearers to devils or jesters, but still the pointed shoes remain popular, winding their way through decades of feasts, markets, and ceremonies. The making of these shoes is an art. Cobblers cut fine leather into narrow shapes, stitching them carefully to create the long taper. Sometimes colored dyes are used, red, green, or blue, to mark them as fashionable. The wealthy decorate their poulaines with embroidery, jewels, or strips of silk, turning shoes into works of vanity as well as clothing. For weddings and feasts, the shoes are polished and perfumed, drawing attention downward, making every step part of a spectacle. And though the fashion seems impractical, nobles are carried by servants in litters or ride horses through muddy streets, so their shoes seldom touch the dirt of the common world. In the eyes of those who wore them, these shoes did not symbolize foolishness but refinement. To wear poulaines was to show you belonged to a culture of elegance, that you followed the currents of style flowing through Europe's courts. Men strutted proudly, their pointed shoes marking them as distinguished, while women too adopted the fashion, their gowns trailing long hems that barely revealed the exaggerated toes beneath. At dances, the points tapped lightly on wooden floors, curving upward like the beaks of exotic birds. And yet, for all their charm, they were the subject of scorn. Chroniclers wrote with disdain of knights hampered by their own shoes, unable to run or fight properly because of their points. Some accounts tell of men cutting off the tips before battle, stuffing them quickly into saddlebags, ashamed of their impracticality. The church declared them sinful, associating the sharp curling toes with the devil's hooves. In sermons, they were condemned as marks of pride, distractions from piety. But as often happens with fashion, condemnation only sharpened their allure. If you picture a medieval feast, you see not only the glitter of candles on silver cups and the rustle of silk gowns, but also the curious outline of shoes under the tables, long points resting against the floor, curling slightly, brushed against by neighbors' feet. Servants move carefully, wary of stepping on them. Outside, in the courtyard, a group of young men strut proudly, their poulaines swaying with each step, laughing at the mockery of elders, certain they embody the height of style. And so these shoes, with their ridiculous points, became one of the strangest habits of the Middle Ages, part fashion, part folly, a symbol of wealth that transformed the simple act of walking into a performance. When you close your eyes and imagine their world, you hear the click of leather on stone, see the glitter of embroidery and candlelight, and smile at the thought of men and women moving so carefully, so proudly, in shoes that defied both comfort and common sense, yet carried with them the peculiar grandeur of their age. Watered wine and weak ale. When the sun rises over a medieval village, the first drink of the day is not clear water from a sparkling spring, but a cup of something else entirely, ale, weak and cloudy, or wine diluted with water, for in this age, water alone is rarely trusted. Streams carry filth from animals and households alike. Wells are sometimes tainted, and rivers flow thick with waste. To drink plain water is to invite sickness, so men, women, and even children reach instead for liquid that has been brewed or fermented, however mildly. Thus, ale and watered wine become the companions of daily life, as common at the table as bread and salt. Ale is brewed in nearly every household. It is not the strong, bitter drink you might imagine today, but a thin, nourishing liquid made quickly from malted grain, water, and yeast. Brewed in small batches, it ferments only for a short time, producing a low-alcohol drink that is safe to consume and filling enough to serve as food in itself. Women are often the brewers, tending their pots and barrels, flavoring the ale with herbs, and carrying pitchers to the table. Children drink it without question, for its alcohol is too weak to intoxicate, but strong enough to kill harmful germs. In towns, ale houses thrive, offering stronger brews for those who can afford to linger in merriment. But at home, ale is everyday sustenance, poured into wooden cups at breakfast, lunch, and supper alike. Wine, too, is present, though more among the wealthy or in regions where vineyards flourish. It is rarely consumed neat. Instead, it is diluted with water, sometimes 2 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes more. The mixing softens its strength and makes it last longer. To serve wine unmixed is considered crude, even barbaric, while the careful dilution reflects refinement. At feasts, pitchers of wine and water are carried separately, poured together in cups with care. Guests sip, not gulp, savouring the mixture as both refreshment and symbol of culture. Among the poor, wine is rare, but when it does appear, perhaps at a festival or wedding, it too is thinned with water, stretching its value as far as possible. Herbs are often added to both ale and wine, not only for flavour, but for health. Wormwood, yarrow, and juniper might be boiled into ale, believed to aid digestion or strengthen the blood. Wine might be warmed with spices, cinnamon, cloves, or ginger, creating a drink both comforting and medicinal. Monks record recipes for such mixtures, prescribing them for fevers or melancholy. A cup of mulled wine in winter is thought to warm the body and protect it from illness. In summer, ale cooled in a stone cellar offers relief from the heat. These drinks are not luxuries but necessities, woven into the fabric of each day. In villages, the brewing of ale is as regular as the baking of bread. Each household takes its turn, the smell of malted grain drifting through the air as kettles boil over hearths. Buckets of ale are carried to neighbours, shared in exchange for favours or goods. Women known for their skill become alewives, brewing more than their household needs and selling the rest in small quantities. Their signs, a bush of greenery hung outside the door, invite passers-by to step in for a cup. Gossip and news spread quickly in these alehouses, where villagers gather in the evenings, their cups of weak ale warming their hands. In towns and castles, the supply of wine flows more steadily. Barrels arrive from vineyards in France, Spain, or the Rhine, rolled into cellars beneath stone halls. Nobles pride themselves on the quality of their wine, boasting of rare vintages, yet even these are mixed with water before drinking. The act of dilution is not shameful but honourable, a sign of restraint. Strong drink is for excess, watered wine is for civility. Servants pour carefully, their movements rehearsed, while lords and ladies lift jewelled cups, savouring the mingled taste of grape and well water. Children, too, sip from these cups. It is not unusual for a boy of 5 to drink ale with his morning bread, or for a girl to share watered wine at supper. To modern eyes, this seems shocking, yet in the Middle Ages it is normal, even necessary. No one trusts plain water unless it comes directly from a clean spring, and such springs are rare in crowded towns. Fermentation provides safety, however mild, and so the youngest and oldest alike depend on it. The weak ale fills their bellies when food is scarce, providing calories as well as drink. And beyond health, these drinks serve as moments of comfort. A weary farmer returning from the fields finds solace in a cool cup of ale, its bitterness light but steady. A noblewoman, seated in her hall, warms her hands around a spiced wine, breathing in the fragrance of cloves and cinnamon, feeling the heat spread through her chest. A child, drowsy at the table, sips watered wine, the taste faintly sweet, before laying down to sleep. In each case, the drink is more than necessity. It is part of the rhythm of life, binding meals and moments together. If you close your eyes and imagine the sound, you hear the splash of ale poured into a wooden cup, the faint clink of pewter as wine and water meet, the murmur of voices rising in comfort and familiarity. The air smells of malt, smoke, and spice. The table is plain, yet the cups are full, and though no one drinks pure water, they feel secure, nourished, content. Such was the strange, steady habit of the Middle Ages, to rely on weak ale and watered wine, not as indulgence but as everyday necessity, a constant thread in the tapestry of their days. Beards as a sign of honor. When you wander through the crowded lanes of a medieval town, your gaze lingers on the faces of the men you pass, and there you see a symbol as weighty as armor or heraldry, the beard. For in this age, a beard is not merely hair upon the chin, but a mark of dignity, authority, and pride. To grow and keep a beard is to declare oneself a man of honor, one who respects tradition and upholds his place in society. The smooth, shaven face belongs to clerics and monks, men who have renounced worldly vanities. But for knights, merchants, and peasants alike, the beard is the visible sign of manhood, a shield of respect that must never be insulted. From the earliest medieval chronicles, tales are told of warriors whose beards defined them. Kings are remembered for the length and color of their facial hair, their portraits painted with flowing locks that seem almost as important as their crowns. A long, full beard signals wisdom and authority, while a shorter, neatly trimmed one speaks of discipline and control. To lay hands upon another man's beard is to commit an offense greater than striking his cheek. It is a violation of honor, a public insult that demands immediate response. In many courts, to seize or cut another's beard without consent is grounds for a duel or bitter feud, for the beard is bound to the soul of the man himself. Among peasants, the beard carries less grandeur, but no less importance. A farmer's beard may be rough, uneven, flecked with the dust of fields, yet it is still his badge of adulthood, proof of labor and endurance. Young boys are teased until the first shadow appears on their cheeks, for only then are they considered truly grown. In villages, old men stroke their beards as they sit by the fire, the gesture a signal of wisdom and reflection. The simple act of combing and smoothing facial hair becomes part of the rhythm of life, an ordinary movement repeated countless times, reminding all of its quiet dignity. Knights and nobles treat their beards with particular care. In chambers filled with polished mirrors of metal, they trim and oil them, using combs carved from bone or ivory. Oils of rosemary or lavender are rubbed into the hair, lending fragrance and sheen. A knight who rides into battle with a proud beard believes it to be a symbol of strength, as though the length of hair itself guards his courage. Chronicles describe lords swearing solemn oaths, "Upon my beard," their promises sealed by this emblem of honor. To break such an oath is to stain not only the man but his beard, a shame carried visibly upon his face. The Church, however, often views beards with suspicion. Monks are expected to shave, their smooth cheeks representing humility and obedience. Bishops argue whether priests should wear beards, some seeing them as marks of wildness, others as symbols of venerable authority. Councils are held to decide the matter, their decrees shifting with time and place. Yet outside the cloisters, the people cling to their beards, unmoved by such debates. For the laity, a beard is too deeply woven into daily life to abandon. Beards are not merely personal but political. Envoys arriving at foreign courts are described by the state of their facial hair, and insults hurled across battle lines often strike at the enemy's beards. Chronicles from the Crusades tell of knights boasting of their unshaven faces as proof of their holy cause, refusing to trim them until victory was won. A captured knight might be humiliated by the cutting of his beard, a punishment worse than chains, for it strips him of his visible pride. In taverns, quarrels erupt if one man mocks another's scraggly whiskers, and blows are traded more swiftly than words. Imagine the marketplace. Men gather around a storyteller, their beards glinting in the morning light, some thick and long, others short and bristling. As they listen, their hands rise unconsciously to stroke their chins, a gesture of thoughtfulness or amusement. Across the way, a youth stands self-consciously, his cheeks bare, yearning for the day when stubble will mark his passage into adulthood. An old man leans on his staff, his white beard flowing down to his chest, and the people treat him with reverence, for his beard itself seems to speak of long years and hard-won wisdom. In homes and halls, tools for beard care are as common as knives for dining. Small combs rest in pockets, ready to untangle hair after a meal. Oils, if available, are treasured, rubbed carefully into the beard before gatherings. Even among the poor, who lack such luxuries, fingers suffice, running through hair to smooth it before entering church or market. The beard is not neglected, for it is the face's garment, a covering more eloquent than silk or velvet. And so, in the medieval world, beards stand as proud banners of honor, shaping how men see themselves and how they are seen by others. To lose a beard is to lose face, to grow one is to gain respect, and to swear upon it is to bind one's word with the weight of visible dignity. If you close your eyes and imagine their world, you see a hall of men, faces lit by fire, beards catching the glow, each strand a thread in the great tapestry of pride, strength, and tradition that bound their lives together. Beds crawling with company. When night descends upon a medieval household and the smoky tallow candle gutters low, the family does not retire each to a private chamber, for such a luxury is rare. Instead, the bed, whether a straw-filled pallet in a peasant's hut or a carved wooden frame in a noble's chamber, becomes a space of sharing, crowded with bodies, blankets, and sometimes even animals. Privacy and sleep is a notion far removed from this world. Here, beds are places of togetherness, where warmth is more valuable than solitude, and where company, whether welcome or not, is part of the night's rhythm. In the cottage of a villager, the bed is a humble frame if there is one at all, sometimes nothing more than a heap of straw spread upon the floor and covered with coarse linen. Upon it lie parents, children, and often a newborn swaddled close to the mother's breast. Brothers and sisters curl against each other for warmth, while the family dog or even a hen may find its way beneath the blanket. The hearth has grown cold, the shutters rattle with the wind, but within the bed there is a shared heat, the mingled breath of many sleepers pressing back against the winter night. It is crowded, yes, but no one expects it otherwise, for to share a bed is not inconvenience but necessity. Even in the houses of the wealthy, beds are rarely solitary. A lord and lady may sleep together upon a frame draped with heavy curtains, yet their children often lie close by, on small pallets drawn up to the chamber. Servants, too, may share the lord's chamber, resting on benches or the floor, ever near to answer a call. In inns and guest houses, travellers are accustomed to sharing beds with strangers, sometimes 2 or 3 to a mattress, separated only by a blanket, if at all. To refuse such closeness would be seen as odd, even suspicious. In a world where space is precious and warmth is fleeting, sharing the bed is simply part of life. The bed itself is not the clean, inviting place one might imagine today. Straw mattresses grow damp and must be replaced often. Blankets are heavy with use. Sheets, if they exist, are rarely washed. Lice and fleas are constant companions, combed out of hair by day but creeping back at night. To scratch and shift beneath the covers is common, and no shame attaches to it. Herbal sachets may be tucked into the bedding, lavender, mint, or wormwood, both to freshen the air and to discourage pests, though their effect is slight. The bed is alive with more than people. It is a world of its own, busy and breathing in the darkness. There is, too, a social dimension to shared beds. In noble courts, it is common for young squires or favoured servants to sleep beside their lords, not as equals but as attendants, ever near to serve. Such arrangements foster intimacy and loyalty, binding master and follower in bonds that extend beyond daylight hours. In monasteries, brothers sleep in long dormitories, each on his narrow pallet, rising together at midnight for prayers. In guest houses, merchants share beds with fellow travellers, and though awkward silences may arise at first, they are soon softened by the sheer ordinariness of the practice. To lie beside another, to hear his breath and feel his warmth, is to participate in a custom as old as the age itself. Imagine the chamber of a castle on a winter's night. The great bed is piled with furs, its curtains drawn tight against the draught. Within lie lord and lady, their children close by on smaller beds. At the foot of the frame, a favoured hound curls in sleep, its fur mingling with the covers. A servant dozes on a stool near the hearth, rising now and again to tend the fire. The room is crowded, the air close, yet no one minds. The flicker of embers casts shadows across sleeping faces, and the mingled breathing of many souls fills the silence. To modern eyes, this sharing may seem intrusive, even uncomfortable, yet, to the medieval mind, solitude is lonelier than any inconvenience, and warmth more precious than space. The bed is not merely a place to sleep, but a gathering, a shelter, a stage for life's tender and mundane moments alike. Children whisper secrets before drifting into slumber. Couples murmur in the night stillness. Old men snore while grandchildren giggle softly beside them. In such closeness, bonds are formed and sustained, woven into the very fabric of nightly rest. And so, in the Middle Ages, the bed is never only yours. It belongs to family, to guests, sometimes even to animals, and the restless crawl of lice. It is crowded and imperfect, yet also warm, secure, and familiar. If you close your eyes and picture it, you see a low room with rafters overhead, straw strewn thick upon the floor, blankets heaped, bodies curled together. The night is long, the world outside is dark and cold, but within the bed, crowded with company, there is the comfort of breath, warmth, and the simple fact of not being alone. Cures from odd ingredients. When sickness comes in the Middle Ages, whether as a cough that will not fade, a fever that burns the brow, or a swelling that refuses to heal, there is no pharmacy of glass bottles and measured powders to bring relief. Instead, there are remedies drawn from fields, kitchens, churches, and imagination cures that seem strange to you now, but were trusted then with earnest faith. Ground toads, powders of bone, blood drawn from veins, charms, whispered over herbs, all these and more made up the great arsenal of healing, where medicine and superstition mingled without boundary. A villager suffering from toothache might visit a local healer, who would grind herbs into a paste, mix it with ashes, and press it against the sore gum. If the pain persisted, the healer might suggest carrying a charm inscribed with holy words, or chewing the root of a particular plant, said to drive away worms, believed to gnaw at the teeth. Should fever strike, a family might brew a draught of chamomile or sage, hoping to cool the blood. But if the fever grew worse, the barber surgeon would be called to bleed the patient, opening a vein to let the excess humour flow, for the theory of the four humours, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile governed every thought of health. To balance the humours was the constant goal. A man too flushed with heat was bled or cooled with lettuce and vinegar. One too sluggish was given hot spices, mustard, or pepper. If illness lingered, stranger remedies appeared. Powdered horn of stag might be mixed into wine, dried earthworms might be swallowed for stomach troubles. To cure epilepsy, some believed it necessary to drink the blood of a freshly killed animal, still warm. For jaundice, the advice might be to eat the liver of a goat, or to gaze upon bright yellow flowers. In every village, recipes passed from mother to daughter, from monk to novice, creating a patchwork of cures both curious and earnest. The toad was often called upon in these remedies. Ground to powder, its body was believed to draw out poison. Tied in a pouch, it was said to ward off plague. Some healers recommended placing a live toad against a swelling, believing it would absorb the illness and die in the patient's place. Snakes, too, found their way into cures, their skins dried and powdered, their flesh boiled into broth. In truth, such remedies seldom healed, yet the faith in them gave comfort, and sometimes that comfort alone eased the suffering. The church, too, played its part in healing. Holy relics were pressed to sick bodies, prayers were chanted over the ill, and water blessed by saints was sprinkled upon wounds. Pilgrims travelled long distances to bathe in sacred springs, believing their waters held power to cure blindness, lameness, or madness. A priest might write a charm upon a strip of parchment, which the sick person wore around the neck, certain that the holy words guarded against evil. For the people of this age, sickness was not only a matter of body but also of spirit, and thus healing could come as much from prayer as from plants. In towns, apothecaries offered more refined concoctions. Their shelves held jars of dried herbs, powders, and rare spices brought from distant lands. Cinnamon, saffron, or sugar, costly though they were, might be mixed into remedies for wealthy patrons. Ointments of rose oil or almond oil were prepared for soothing wounds. A merchant might pay dearly for a draught promising to ward off plague. Its ingredients a mystery, but its reputation fierce. Yet even here, alongside the skill of apothecaries, superstition lingered. Unicorn horn, believed to cure poison, was sometimes sold, though in truth it was the horn of a narwhal brought from far-off seas. Imagine the scene: a cottage dimly lit, a child lying pale upon a straw bed, fevered and restless. The mother places a bundle of herbs beneath the pillow, whispering a charm she learned from her own mother. A neighbor brings a dried toad, tied with string, to hang above the bed. Later, the village barber arrives, his hands stained with blood from other houses, and he opens a vein in the child's arm, letting a small bowl fill with crimson. Outside, the wind moans, the family prays, and all wait in hope that these acts, however strange, might turn the tide. In monasteries, the picture is calmer, but no less curious. A monk bends over a manuscript, copying recipes for remedies into neat Latin script. He writes of plants like comfrey for broken bones, rue for fever, fennel for eyesight, all observed from the cloister's garden. Yet in the margins he adds charms, words to be spoken, signs to be drawn in the air, invocations of saints to strengthen the cure. The line between faith and medicine is not drawn sharply, for to the medieval mind, both are necessary to mend the fragile body. And so, cures of odd ingredients filled the lives of the sick and hopeful, weaving together earth, beast, and spirit into a single fabric of healing. Some remedies soothed, some harmed, many did nothing at all. Yet they carried with them belief that illness could be fought, that pain could be eased, that the world itself offered tools for survival. If you close your eyes, you see shelves of jars, bundles of herbs hanging from beams, the glimmer of a relic by candlelight, the murmur of prayers, the smell of boiling broth, a strange, enduring world where healing was as much about faith as about cure. Eating meat on Fridays forbidden. When the bells of the church ring out across the medieval countryside, their sound does more than call people to prayer. It shapes the very rhythm of their meals, dictating what may be eaten and when. Among the many rules of Christian life in the Middle Ages, few are as strictly observed as the ban on meat on Fridays. To abstain is not simply a matter of custom but of obedience to faith, for Friday recalls the day of Christ's Passion, a day marked by sacrifice and restraint. Across Europe, from village huts to castle halls, the table changes when Friday comes, its dishes shifting away from flesh to fish, grains, and humble fare, transforming the act of eating into an act of devotion. For the peasant, who may taste meat only rarely in any case, the rule is less burden than confirmation of daily habit. His meals are built from pottage of beans or peas, bread of rye or barley, and perhaps a little cheese or eggs. On Fridays, he eats much the same, though he avoids any scraps of pork or mutton that might otherwise have flavoured his stew. If fish can be caught in a nearby stream, it is a welcome addition, roasted upon a stick or boiled with herbs. But if no fish is found, the meal remains plain, and the family bows their heads before it, certain that their hunger joins them more closely to the suffering of Christ. In monasteries, the observance is stricter still. Monks live already within rules of fasting and abstinence, but Fridays mark a deeper silence at the table. Flesh is absent, and the meals consist of vegetables, legumes, and bread, perhaps flavoured with oil or broth. Fish, when available, is considered a fitting substitute, and in many monasteries ponds are built to raise carp, trout, or eels for this very purpose. Monks file into the refectory, sit upon their benches, and eat in silence while one among them reads aloud from Scripture. The sound of chewing is faint, the scraping of spoons gentle, as the words of Holy Writ echo above the humble fare. Among the nobility, the rule of abstinence creates opportunities for display. Castle kitchens, usually filled with the scent of roasting meat, turn to other tasks on Fridays. Cooks prepare fish brought in barrels of brine from the coast, or fresh from rivers that wind through the Lord's lands. Salt cod, herring, or lamprey appear on the table, accompanied by sauces rich with spice and vinegar. Far from being meagre, these Friday feasts can be sumptuous, for though flesh is forbidden, ingenuity is not. Nobles pride themselves on the variety of dishes they can present while remaining within the letter of the law. Almond milk is used in place of dairy. Spices from distant lands flavor vegetables and grains. Elaborate pastries hide fish within their golden crusts. In this way, abstinence becomes not only devotion, but a display of wealth and refinement. The law extends beyond Friday. All of Lent, the great season before Easter, is marked by abstaining from meat. Advent, too, carries days of fasting, as do vigils of certain saints. Altogether, nearly half the year is filled with restrictions on flesh, shaping medieval diets profoundly. Fishmongers thrive in towns, their stalls crowded on Thursdays, as households prepare for the coming day. Salted fish, dried and preserved, is a common sight, hung from rafters or stacked in barrels. Inland, where fresh fish is scarce, salted cod becomes the staple, its toughness softened by long soaking before cooking. In coastal villages, fishermen rejoice, for the church's rules make their trade essential. To eat meat on a Friday without dispensation is considered a grave fault. Priests remind their flocks of the sin, and penalties may follow for those who disregard the rule openly. Yet dispensations exist. Travelers, the sick, and those too poor to find other food may be excused. Even so, most adhere to the custom willingly, for it is woven into the fabric of their lives. Children grow up knowing that Friday means no meat, and they accept it as naturally as the turning of the seasons. Imagine a Friday evening in a village. Families gather around their hearths, the pots bubbling with pea soup, bread baking on the stone, and perhaps a small fish roasting on the fire. The air is thick with the scent of herbs rather than fat, the atmosphere more subdued than on other nights. In the manor hall, servants carry platters of fish in spice sauce, bowls of beans, and loaves of fresh bread. The lord and lady dine with dignity, showing their piety as much as their wealth. Across the cloister walls of a monastery, the brothers sit silently, their spoons dipping into bowls of lentils, the steady voice of scripture guiding their thoughts. Thus, the simple act of eating is transformed into devotion. Food becomes a language of faith, each mouthful a reminder of sacrifice, each absence of meat a sign of obedience. To live in the Middle Ages is to live by the Church's calendar, where days of feasting and fasting intertwine, shaping not only the spirit, but the very flavor of life. If you close your eyes, you can almost taste it. The salted fish softened in broth, the warm bread broken by hand, the humble vegetables stewed until tender, all taken in quiet reverence, all shared with the memory of a greater sacrifice. The danger of pointy hats. When you walk into the echoing hall of a medieval court, past the stone pillars and flickering torches, your eyes are drawn not first to the glitter of jewels or the shimmer of silks, but to the tall, improbable shapes rising above the heads of noblewomen, the hennins, those towering conical hats that stretch skyward like spires. Some are slender and needle-thin, draped with gauzy veils that flutter with each step. Others are broader, like inverted funnels, their brims encircled with bands of embroidery and pearls. At first glance, they look like a dream, or perhaps a jest hat so tall they threaten to scrape the beams of the ceiling. Yet in the 15th century, such hats are the height of fashion, worn with pride and with peril. For the hennin, admired though it is, brings with it both laughter and danger. The origins of the style are whispered to come from the East, from the fashions of Mongol or Persian courts brought back by travellers and crusaders. However they arrived, by the late Middle Ages, they spread through France, Burgundy, and England, becoming symbols of nobility and refinement. To wear a hennin is to declare one's wealth, for the tall cones require fine, stiffened fabric, and their veils are made from silks that only the privileged can afford. The greater the height, the greater the status, some hennins rising over 3 feet, turning the act of passing through a doorway into a delicate maneuver. But these hats are more than impractical. They are hazards. Chronicles and satirical poems alike describe the awkwardness of women who cannot sit comfortably in carriages or bend easily without their hennins toppling. Servants must help guide them through narrow doors, and once seated, their heads tower above the rest, swaying gently as they move. At feasts, candles placed too close to the hats sometimes set veils aflame, and there are tales half jest, half warning of ladies who leaned too near a hearth and found their hennins smouldering, forcing others to beat out the fire before disaster struck. Thus, while admired, the hennin is also feared, a beauty edged with risk. The clergy, as with so many fashions, condemned the hats. Priests thundered from pulpits that hennins were symbols of vanity, rising like towers to mock humility. They claimed the pointed shape imitated the horns of the devil, making women appear demonic in their pride. Some towns even issued decrees limiting the size of hennins, forbidding women below certain ranks from wearing them at all. Yet such laws only added to their allure, for forbidden fashion is often the most desired. Noble women ignored the warnings, adjusting their veils proudly as they paraded through markets or courts, their hats gleaming with threads of gold in the sunlight. Among the people, the hennin became a subject of mockery. Peasants whispered and laughed when they saw noblewomen passing, calling their hats steeples or sugar loaves. Artists drew caricatures of women leaning sideways, their hennins so tall they seemed ready to topple them into the mud. Yet even those who mocked could not help but gaze, for the hats transformed the women into figures otherworldly, ethereal, their veils trailing like mist. To see such a sight was to glimpse both folly and splendor, the strangeness of fashion that defies practicality in pursuit of beauty. Imagine a feast in a noble hall. The air is heavy with the smell of roasted meat and spiced wine, the chatter of courtiers rising and falling like music. At the high table, ladies sit in their hennins, veils catching the candlelight, their faces pale beneath their towering hats. When they turn their heads, the gauze drifts like smoke. When they lean forward to speak, their neighbors must tilt their bodies to avoid the swaying points. Suddenly, one of the veils brushes too close to a flame, and a gasp ripples through the hall as a servant rushes to snuff it out. Laughter follows, nervous yet admiring, for danger seems part of the spectacle. Even among women themselves, the hennin stirs debate. Some embrace it as a mark of dignity, a way to set themselves apart from common folk, their height lending them presence in any room. Others find it cumbersome, a burden they wear only because fashion demands it. Letters and chronicles hint at women tugging irritably at the weight of their hennins after hours of display, longing to cast them aside in private. And yet, when morning comes and court assembles again, the hats reappear, perched high, veils flowing, for no one wishes to be left behind in the theatre of fashion. If you close your eyes, you see a narrow street where a lady walks slowly, her hennin rising high, the veil trailing behind like a silver stream. Children stare and giggle, a peasant mutters a jest under his breath, yet others watch in awe, struck by the sight of a figure that seems more like a spirit than a woman. The hennin, absurd and dangerous though it is, fulfills its purpose, to command attention, to inspire talk, to create an image not easily forgotten. And so, in the medieval world, pointy hats are more than decoration. They are statements of wealth and daring, symbols of vanity and targets of ridicule, admired for their grace and feared for their danger. They scrape ceilings, catch fire, and draw laughter, yet they endure for generations, reminders of how far people will go to shape themselves into visions of splendor, even if it means risking both comfort and safety. In their pointed heights, you glimpse the curious balance of the age between piety and pride, between ridicule and reverence, between the earthbound body and the lofty desire to rise above it. Keeping birds indoors, step into the smoky hall of a noble household, and amid the clatter of servants and the scent of roasting meat, you hear a flutter of wings. It is not the sound of pigeons outside in the eaves, but of birds within hawks perched proudly on their masters' fists, parrots chattering in wooden cages, and even doves fluttering freely along the rafters. In the Middle Ages, birds are not confined solely to fields and skies. They are companions, symbols, entertainers, and sometimes even status markers, kept indoors to brighten the long hours of castle life, or to demonstrate the wealth of those who own them. Foremost among these are the hunting birds, falcons, hawks, and goshawks prized by lords and ladies alike. Falconry is more than a pastime. It is an art, a bond between noble and bird, practiced with patience and pride. A hawk may be brought into the hall, hooded to keep it calm, resting upon its master's gloved hand while meals are taken. Its presence commands admiration, for only those of wealth and rank can keep and train such creatures. In tapestries and chronicles, noble women are often depicted with falcons perched upon their wrists, the image of elegance and control. Even indoors, the bird is a reminder of the hunt, of wide-open skies and swift pursuits, brought into the intimacy of the chamber as a living emblem of prestige. Yet hawks are not the only feathered guests. Exotic birds, brought from distant lands by merchants and crusaders, become wonders to display. Parrots, with their bright feathers and strange cries, are treasured curiosities. To hear a bird mimic human speech is a marvel, and guests crowd to watch, laughing as the parrot squawks out phrases it has overheard. Peacocks, too, sometimes wander within the halls of the wealthy, their jeweled tails dragging across rush-strewn floors, admired as much for their beauty as for the meat they provide when roasted at feasts. Songbirds in cages brighten chambers with their music, their chirping cutting through the solemnity of stone walls. For common folk, too, birds play a role indoors, though in humbler ways. Doves and pigeons are often kept within lofts or special coops attached to cottages, their droppings valuable for fertilizer, their eggs and meat a welcome addition to the diet. Chickens sometimes wander through the kitchen, scratching at the rushes on the floor, clucking softly as children chase them away from the bread dough rising near the fire. In the cold of winter, small animals and birds are brought into living spaces for warmth and protection, their presence accepted as part of the household's life. The flutter of wings, the occasional cluck or coo, becomes background to the hum of daily existence. Superstition and symbolism surround these creatures as well. Birds are seen as messengers, sometimes carrying omens of fortune or doom. A hawk flying into a hall unbidden might be taken as a sign from heaven. A crow cawing at the window could foretell death. Yet kept birds, trained and tamed, are thought to bring luck. Amulets carved with feathers are worn for protection, and songs of nightingales inspire poets to weave tales of love and longing. The presence of birds indoors blurs the line between the wild and the domestic, reminding all who see them of the mystery of flight, the freedom that humans cannot share. Picture the scene of a winter's evening in a great hall. Rushes cover the floor, a fire crackles in the hearth, and at the high table sits a nobleman with a hooded falcon perched upon his gloved hand. The bird shifts its talons slightly, feathers ruffling in the glow of firelight, while servants pass with dishes of fish and bread. At the lower end of the hall, a caged parrot squawks suddenly, imitating the laugh of a steward, causing the guests to burst into laughter. Above, pigeons roost in the rafters, their cooing blending with the hum of conversation. Children peer up at them, tossing crumbs, while a hound snaps playfully at a hen that has wandered too near. To medieval minds, such scenes are not unusual, but part of the fabric of life. Animals and people share spaces freely. Birds are not only useful but delightful, their presence adding colour and sound to otherwise dim and heavy interiors. The flutter of wings, the gleam of feathers, the sudden burst of song all soften the hardness of stone walls and timber beams, bringing a touch of wildness into the human world. And so, keeping birds indoors becomes one of the curious habits of the age, a mingling of practicality, fashion, and affection. Whether falcons treated as noble partners in the hunt, parrots admired as exotic marvels, or pigeons tended for food and fertilizer, birds weave themselves into the life of the household. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The coo of a dove at dawn, the rustle of wings in the rafters, the sudden cry of a hawk breaking the hush of the hall, the strange, familiar music of feathers in the heart of the medieval home. Toilets above rivers. When you walk along the outer walls of a medieval castle or glance up at the timbered upper stories of a townhouse, you notice curious little projections jutting outward, small wooden chambers, clinging precariously above the open air. They are not balconies for leisure, nor alcoves for storage, but the latrines, the garderobes, as they are often called. To step into one is to step into a narrow space, a simple bench with a hole cut into it, and below that hole lies the answer to where waste is carried, down, directly into the rushing moat or the flowing river beneath. It is a habit that seems strange to modern eyes, yet it was entirely ordinary to the people of the Middle Ages, who thought little of sending their refuse straight into the waters that coursed past their walls. In castles, garderobes are often built high in the outer walls, the stone corbelling supporting a small chamber that overhangs the moat. The user sits upon a wooden seat, the waste dropping through a vertical shaft or chute, sometimes lined with stone, sometimes only timber. In theory, the moat or stream below carries it away, cleansing the place. In practice, the air around the castle walls often bears the sharp, pungent scent of what lingers. Guards stationed nearby do not envy their posts, for the stench rises with the wind, and chronicles speak of soldiers attempting to poison enemies by polluting the water supply that flowed beneath such latrines. In towns, the arrangement is humbler but no less direct. Houses often project their privies out over streams, ditches, or even the open street. Waste drops down into whatever lies below, to be carried away by rain or current. In some places, entire neighborhoods smell sharply of these practices, the mingled odors of refuse, tanneries, and kitchens rising together in the narrow lanes. Yet the people who live there are accustomed to it, their senses dulled by daily familiarity. They know no different, and so life continues, the privy above the river, as natural as the hearth within the hall. Monasteries and manor houses sometimes improve upon the design, building long rows of latrines with multiple seats, the waste carried into cesspits or streams. Monks file in at appointed times, sitting side by side, their silence accompanied by the trickle below. In some abbeys, clever channels divert running water beneath the latrines, flushing them more efficiently than in towns. Still, the odor lingers, and herbs like mint or lavender are planted nearby in an attempt to mask it. In wealthier homes, chambers may be hung with cloth or lined with straw to absorb some of the smell, but even so, the experience is far from pleasant. Yet these privies have their own peculiar roles beyond necessity. In castles, garderobes sometimes double as storage places for garments, despite their odor. The constant draft of air, it was believed, helped protect furs and robes from moths and damp. Thieves, too, sometimes used garderobe shafts as secret passages, climbing up or down the vertical chutes to gain entry to a fortress. Tales abound of enemies slipping in through these foul routes, braving the stench for the sake of conquest. Thus, even the toilet could become a place of intrigue and danger. For peasants, who may lack such conveniences entirely, the riverbank itself serves as privy. People step into the shadows, crouching at the edge of streams or ditches, their waste joining the flow of water, used for washing clothes, watering animals, and sometimes even drinking. Diseases spread easily this way, though the link between waste and sickness is not fully understood. Instead, illness is blamed on miasmas, on bad air rising from the filth, rather than the filth itself. And so the practice continues, ingrained in the daily life of both village and town. Imagine standing in a castle chamber, stepping into the garderobe set in the wall. The stone is cold beneath your feet, the space narrow and dim, a shaft yawning below. You hear the faint rush of water, or perhaps only the echo of the drop. Outside, the moat gleams under the moonlight, rippling as it carries away what the castle has given it. In the town below, another house juts over the street, a bucket overturned, its contents mingling with the rain. A passer-by pulls his cloak close, hurrying past with head bowed, for he knows well what might fall from above. To us, it is strange, even shocking, to imagine toilets suspended over rivers and streets. Yet in the Middle Ages, it is simply the way of things. Waste is part of life, and life must continue, no matter the odor or the hazard. The garderobe above the moat, the privy over the ditch, the open street that serves as sewer, all are reminders of a world where necessity shaped habit, and habit became custom. If you close your eyes, you can almost smell the mingled air of stone walls, river water, and human presence, a reality as constant and unremarkable to them as it is remarkable to us. Lice combs as daily tools. If you step into a medieval household at dawn, you will see, alongside the fire being coaxed back to life and bread set to rise, a quieter ritual taking place. A mother sits by the hearth, a child on her lap, and in her hand is a small wooden or bone comb with teeth set close together. She draws it slowly through the child's hair, pausing to inspect what clings between the tines. This is not vanity but necessity, for lice are constant companions in the Middle Ages, endured by peasant and noble alike. Combs become as essential as knives or spoons, humble tools of daily survival against the crawling world that hides in hair, beards, and bedding. These lice combs are crafted with care. Some are simple, carved from boxwood or horn, with fine teeth narrow enough to trap the tiny creatures. Others, belonging to wealthier families, are made from ivory, sometimes decorated with patterns along the handle. Archaeologists have found them buried in graves, tucked among personal belongings, a sign of how important they were. For to be without a comb was to surrender to endless itching, to give lice free rein over scalp and beard. Each morning, each evening, the comb was drawn through hair, catching insects and their eggs, which were then crushed between fingernails or tossed into the fire. In castles, even lords and ladies are not spared. Beneath their velvet hoods and golden circlets, lice creep as persistently as in the huts of peasants. Servants are tasked with combing their master's hair, inspecting locks by candlelight, and perfuming them afterward with rosemary or lavender. Noblewomen sit patiently, while attendants pass the comb through their long braids, dropping lice into bowls of water or oil to drown them. Perfumed oils are applied afterward to mask the smell and to soothe the irritated scalp, but the pests always return. Combs are stored in caskets of wood or silver, treasured as much as mirrors or pins, for without them life would be unbearable. Monks, too, keep their combs close. In dormitories, after prayers, they sit upon benches and comb one another's tonsured heads, a quiet ritual of care and necessity. Lice are accepted with resignation, for poverty and humility leave no space for luxury. Yet even here, the comb is indispensable, and rules forbid monks from neglecting their grooming. In taverns and marketplaces, peasants scratch openly, unconcerned, while mothers comb their children in public, crushing lice between stones or fingernails. No one finds it shameful, for it is simply part of being human in this age. Superstition offers its own remedies. Some believe that wearing a charm of amber or garlic around the neck will keep lice away. Others rub vinegar into the hair, or wash with infusions of nettle, hoping to repel the pests. Ashes from the hearth, mixed with lard, are sometimes smeared upon the scalp as a treatment, though the smell is strong. Yet despite these efforts, the comb remains the most reliable weapon. Its steady scraping teeth are trusted more than any charm, its daily use the only true relief from constant itching. Imagine the rhythm of it. A mother combing her child, pausing to flick the comb clean against a bowl, the child wincing slightly but enduring. A nobleman seated in his chamber, while a servant carefully draws an ivory comb through his beard, whispering apologies for each tug. A monk in the cloister garden, patiently combing his own tonsure in the sunlight, muttering prayers as he does. In each case, the action is the same. A small, persistent battle fought day after day against an enemy that never truly leaves. Even bedding and clothes are part of this struggle. Lice nest not only in hair, but in woolen tunics, cloaks, and sheets. Thus, combs are joined by the labor of boiling garments when possible, though water is precious and fuel costly. More often, clothes are beaten with sticks or hung in the sun, the warmth driving some of the pests away. Yet when night comes and families crowd together in beds, the lice return, crawling from one to another, unstoppable. The comb waits patiently for morning, ready once again to restore a small measure of comfort. To modern minds, the presence of lice seems unbearable, but to the medieval world it is as ordinary as the barking of dogs or the ringing of church bells. Combs are never far from hand, always ready to serve. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the sound of teeth scraping through hair, the quiet sighs of relief, the crackle of lice crushed in the fire. The lice comb, humble and persistent, is not a curiosity but a companion, its daily work a reminder of the closeness of life, the acceptance of discomfort, and the resilience of those who lived with such constant burdens. Bells to ward off storms. High upon the tower of a medieval church hangs a bell, heavy and solemn, its metal darkened by years of smoke and rain. By day, its toll calls villagers to prayer, marks the passing of hours, and rings out for weddings or funerals. But when clouds gather thick and black upon the horizon, when thunder growls in the distance and the wind begins to lash at shutters, that same bell takes on a new, fearful duty. For in the Middle Ages, people believe the ringing of church bells can drive away storms, frighten off lightning, and scatter the demons said to ride upon the thunder. And so, when the sky darkens, the bell ropes are seized, and the tower resounds with desperate sound, a great iron voice raised against the fury of nature. This practice grows from the deep belief that storms are not mere accidents of weather, but signs of spiritual battle. Lightning is thought to be the weapon of angry spirits, thunder the roar of demons or the wrath of God. To protect homes, fields, and flocks, the villagers turn to the most powerful symbol they know, the consecrated bell. Cast in holy metal, blessed by priests, inscribed with crosses and prayers, the bell is believed to carry divine force. Its voice, echoing across the valley, is said to break apart storm clouds, to drive away spirits, and to shield the village from harm. In many chronicles, bells are described as the very defenders of communities. When storms rise, men rush up the tower, pulling the ropes with all their strength. As rain lashes through the windows, the bell booms again and again, its deep tone rolling across fields where sheep huddle and peasants kneel in prayer. Each peal is both warning and protection, a call to shelter, a plea to heaven. Mothers hush their children, whispering that the bell will keep the lightning away, that no demon can withstand its holy voice. The storm rages on, but the people believe they are guarded. Not all are safe in this duty. Lightning strikes towers with terrifying force, and many stories tell of bell ringers killed at their posts. Chronicles record names of men who clung to the ropes as fire from the sky burst through the roof, consuming wood and melting metal. Yet, even in the face of such danger, the practice continues, for the need to believe in protection outweighs the fear. To ring the bell in storm is an act of courage and devotion, one that binds the fate of the community to the strength of a single sound. Superstition adds layers of meaning to this custom. Some believe that demons ride upon storm clouds, seeking souls to seize, and that the ringing of the bell drives them back to the darkness. Others whisper that each toll strikes a blow against evil itself, a reminder to heaven that the village below remains faithful. Bells are given names, as though they are living guardians: Maria, Michael, or Gabriel, called upon in times of peril. The sound of the bell becomes more than noise, it is the very voice of heaven echoing across earth. In towns and cities, where great cathedrals rise, the peal of bells during storms is even more dramatic. Dozens of bells may ring together, their overlapping voices rolling like thunder of their own, fighting storm with storm. The sound shakes windows, startles horses, and fills the air with a cacophony so loud it seems impossible for spirits or lightning to pierce it. In villages, the effect is humbler, but no less heartfelt. A single bell booms into the rain, its echoes swallowed by the hills, yet the people listen and believe, comforted by its constancy. Picture the scene. A farmer stands in his field, his crops bending beneath the sudden gale. Lightning forks across the sky, and thunder shakes the earth. Yet above it all, he hears the bell tolling from the church tower, steady and unyielding. He crosses himself, muttering a prayer, reassured that the bell's holy sound will keep his harvest safe. In the village, children cling to their mothers as the thunder booms, and she tells them softly, "Do you hear it? The bell is speaking. We are safe." In the tower, two men pull the ropes with all their strength, their arms aching, sweat and rain mingling upon their brows. Yet they do not stop, for the life of the village seems bound to their effort. The faith in bells continues for centuries, even as storms strike and towers fall. To the medieval mind, the bell is more than bronze and iron. It is prayer given voice, a guardian of fields and homes, a weapon against the unseen. The danger of lightning, the deaths of ringers, the constant return of storms, none of these diminish the practice. Each time the sky darkens, the ropes are seized once more, the bell's voice resounds, and the people listen with hope. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it now. The rolling toll of a great bell, booming across hills and valleys, rising above wind and rain. It speaks with the weight of centuries, with the mingled fear and faith of those who believed its sound could turn aside the fury of heaven. In that ringing, You hear not only the call of metal against storm, but the heartbeat of an age that sought protection in every way it could, clinging to the power of sound to banish both darkness and dread. Children as little adults. When you walk through the narrow lanes of a medieval village, or pass beneath the vaulted arches of a castle courtyard, you see children, but not in the way you might expect. They are not wrapped in the bright colours of youth, nor given endless hours of play. Instead, they are dressed in garments that mimic their parents' clothing, smaller versions of adult tunics and gowns, tiny belts fastened around their waists, small shoes strapped upon their feet. To the medieval eye, childhood is not a stage of innocence to be protected, but a brief passage into work and duty. Children are seen as little adults, expected to learn quickly, to carry burdens, and to take their place in the rhythm of life as soon as they are able. From the age of 5 or 6, boys and girls are given tasks within the household. A child in a peasant family tends to geese, carries water, or watches younger siblings. Slight hands are put to work, pulling weeds in the fields or spinning wool into thread. For noble children, duties differ, but are no less pressing. A young boy may be sent to serve as a page in another lord's household, learning manners, weaponry, and loyalty. A girl may be taught to manage servants, to spin fine cloth, or to prepare herbs for the still-room. Childhood is apprenticeship to adulthood, shaped by the tasks of survival. Play is not absent, but it often mirrors the adult world. Children fashion toy swords from sticks, imitating knights in battle, or cradle dolls carved from wood, mimicking the care of infants. Games of ball, hoop, or chase fill their brief leisure, but even these are seen as practice for agility, strength, and readiness. Festivals bring laughter, with children tumbling in the streets, joining in dances, or chasing ribbons in the wind. Yet when the feast ends, the duties return, and the child is once more expected to bear himself or herself with the seriousness of age. The clothes they wear reinforce this view. Infants, until they can walk, are swaddled tightly in cloth, their limbs bound straight, as though to shape their bodies into sturdiness. Once freed from swaddling, they are dressed like miniature adults. Boys wear tunics and hose, their hair cut in the same styles as their fathers. Girls wear long gowns, often indistinguishable from their mothers, except in size. There is no bright separation of age in costume, no nursery fashion, only the mirroring of adulthood, teaching children through clothing itself that they belong already to the same world. Education follows the same course. Boys destined for learning are sent to monasteries or cathedral schools, where they sit upon benches, quills in hand, copying Latin texts under the stern gaze of masters. They rise before dawn for prayers, chant psalms, and spend long hours memorizing scriptures. Girls of noble families may be taught to read, though most learn instead the arts of household management, weaving, embroidery, and the keeping of accounts. Peasant children, if they learn letters at all, do so from a village priest or from sheer necessity, scratching their names on documents or tallying numbers in trade. In every case, childhood is seen as preparation, not as a sanctuary. Yet love and tenderness exist in these households. Parents grieve deeply when children die, as they often do, taken by sickness or famine. Cradles are rocked gently, lullabies sung in soft voices, charms hung above infants to protect them from harm. Mothers kiss their children's foreheads before sending them into fields, and fathers ruffle their hair when they return from tasks. Affection is not absent. It is simply woven into a world where necessity presses hard. Children are cherished, but they are also needed, their small hands vital to the family's survival. Imagine a morning in a peasant hut. The mother rises first, stirs the fire, and sets her eldest daughter to watch the baby while her son carries a bucket to the well. The boy stumbles under its weight, yet he persists, learning strength by practice. In a noble hall, a page of 10 years bows awkwardly to his lord, carrying a basin of water for washing hands. He listens intently to the steward's lessons, rehearsing the gestures of courtesy that will one day mark him as a knight. In a convent, a girl stitches embroidery into a strip of linen, her stitches uneven but improving, as her mistress guides her hand. Everywhere, children move in the shadows of adults, imitating, practicing, becoming. Even in play, adulthood is present. A group of boys chase each other in the street, wooden swords clashing as they shout the names of heroes. Girls gather in circles, clapping hands, singing rhymes that echo the stories of saints or the duties of the household. Their laughter rings bright, yet it always carries the undertone of preparation, as though even joy itself must rehearse the seriousness to come. Childhood is brief, a season of learning rather than of lingering. And so, in the medieval world, children are never only children. They are apprentices to life, shaped quickly into the roles their families and faith demand. Dressed as little adults, working beside their elders, learning through imitation and necessity, they grow not in sheltered innocence, but in constant preparation. If you close your eyes, you see them clearly. A boy struggling with a heavy bucket, a girl smoothing her gown like her mother's, a child clutching a wooden sword, face set in mock seriousness. They are small, yes, but already they carry the weight of adulthood upon their narrow shoulders, their lives unfolding in the slow, steady rhythm of duty and faith. Sumptuary laws on clothes. When you enter the bustling streets of a medieval town, the marketplace dazzles with colours and textures. Bolts of dyed cloth, fur-lined cloaks swinging from shoulders, and silken veils fluttering in the wind. Yet behind this spectacle lies a quiet tension, for not everyone is free to wear what they please. Across Europe, kings and councils pass sumptuary laws, strict rules that dictate who may wear velvet, who may wear silk, who may wear a fur of ermine or a thread of gold. These laws reach into the closets of nobles and the chests of merchants, reminding all that clothing is not only fashion, but a declaration of rank, of order, of obedience to the social hierarchy. The purpose is simple: to preserve distinction. In a world where merchants grow wealthy, their wives dressed as richly as baronesses, rulers fear that lines between noble and common might blur, so they decree that only lords may wear scarlet, only knights may adorn themselves with spurs of gold, only the highest ladies may drape themselves in ermine. To disobey is to risk fine or confiscation, even public shame. The colour purple, long a mark of imperial dignity, is often reserved for royalty alone. The sumptuary codes become a woven language, each thread telling the viewer who a person is allowed to be. For peasants, these laws mean little, for their garments are simple by necessity. Homespun wool, dyed dull with onion skins or left in its natural hues of brown and grey, forms the dress of the fields. But for merchants, artisans, and their families, the temptation to rise above one's station through dress is strong. A wealthy merchant's wife might order a gown of imported silk, its sheen dazzling in the candlelight. If she wears it in public, tongues wag, neighbours whisper, and the town bailiff may soon come knocking, reminding her that such fabric belongs only to nobility. To dress above one's station is to court suspicion, envy, and censure. Yet enforcement is uneven. In some towns, laws are ignored, their authority undermined by bribery or indifference. In others, clerks carefully inspect clothing at festivals and markets, writing down offenders' names. Chronicles tell of women forced to remove forbidden veils, of men fined for the length of their sleeves or the brightness of their hose. The laws attempt to measure every detail: how wide a noblewoman's fur trim may be, how long a merchant's shoes may stretch, how many pearls may adorn a headdress. Fashion becomes a battlefield where status is policed by inches and stitches. Despite these restrictions, creativity flourishes. Those forbidden velvet may wear fine wool dyed in rich colours. Those barred from ermine may line their cloaks with squirrel fur, cheaper but still warm. Those who cannot flaunt gold may embroider with silk thread, intricate patterns that delight the eye. Merchants' wives adorn themselves with jewellery instead of gowns, rings gleaming upon every finger, necklaces heavy with amber or coral. In this way, people skirt the edges of the law, expressing wealth and ambition without quite overstepping the rules. For nobles, sumptuary laws serve as armour of status. To wear silk is not only a matter of comfort, but of right, proof of one's place above the common crowd. A lady in a gown of crimson velvet walks through the market knowing that all eyes turn upon her, not only for beauty but for the symbol of rank stitched into her sleeves. A knight dons gilded spurs, certain that no merchant may imitate him without punishment. The laws reinforce what custom already declares. that the world is ordered, each person clothed according to station, the weave of society as fixed as the weave of cloth. Imagine a feast in a great hall. Lords in silks of blue and crimson recline at the high table, their furs thick, their belts gleaming with golden buckles. Below them, merchants and stewards sit in garments of good wool, dyed but plain, the difference clear. At the lowest benches, peasants wear tunics of rough cloth, undyed and patched, their sleeves rolled back from labour. The hall becomes a living tapestry of the laws themselves, each garment proclaiming its wearer's place in the hierarchy. No one mistakes one for the other. Clothing speaks louder than words, yet resentment brews beneath the surface. Some merchants grumble that their coin buys silk as easily as a lord's, that they should be free to wear what they can afford. Others laugh quietly, flaunting jewels or fine wool dyed deep scarlet, daring the authorities to stop them. In towns where trade prospers, the boundaries blur despite the laws. Still, rulers persist in issuing edicts, for the sight of wealth imitating nobility threatens the very fabric of medieval order. And so, sumptuary laws shape not only wardrobes, but identities. They remind each person of their place, stitching rank into fabric, binding obedience into seams. If you close your eyes, you see a crowded street, a lady sweeping past in velvet, her veil trailing silk, a merchant's wife glancing enviously, clutching her woolen gown, a bailiff eyeing the crowd, ready to enforce the law. Clothing is no longer mere cloth, but the visible order of the world, a silent proclamation of who may stand above and who must remain below. Dogs at the dining table. When the heavy doors of a medieval hall creak open and the scent of roasted meats fills the air, the company that gathers at the long wooden tables is not limited to lords, ladies, and their guests. For beneath the benches, weaving between the rushes strewn on the floor, or sitting boldly at their masters' sides, dogs are present too. They are not kept outside as intruders, but welcomed into the very heart of the feast, fed scraps from the hand, their presence accepted as ordinary as the clatter of spoons or the laughter of men. To dine in the Middle Ages is to dine with dogs, companions as constant as the food itself. Hounds are especially favoured among nobles. Hunting dogs, sleek and strong, are prized as much for their loyalty as for their skill in the chase. A lord may keep his greyhound at his feet as he eats, stroking its head absently between courses. When the servants bring in a platter of venison, it is these very hounds who help to bring it down in the forest, and now they wait expectantly for bones tossed beneath the table. To deny them would seem ungrateful, for they are partners in both sport and sustenance. Chroniclers write of great feasts where entire packs of dogs roamed the hall, snapping at scraps, their barks mingling with the hum of music and conversation. Even in humbler homes, dogs share in meals. A peasant's hound may sit close to the hearth, waiting patiently while its master breaks bread. Bits of crust or gristle are thrown to it, and children laugh as it snaps the morsels from the air. The dog is part of the household, guarding by night and working by day, and at table it takes its small reward. Cats may linger too, chasing mice among the rushes, but it is the dog who claims the honoured place, fed directly by human hand. In such closeness, the line between human and animal blurs, the meal becoming a communion of sorts, shared across species. The presence of dogs at table is not always peaceful. They fight among themselves for scraps, snarl when stepped upon, and sometimes leap onto the boards in search of better fare. Satirical poems of the time mock the chaos of feasts where dogs overturned dishes and sent servants scrambling. Etiquette manuals, too, caution diners against tossing too many bones under the table, lest the hounds grow quarrelsome and disrupt the company. Yet even with these inconveniences, no one imagines banishing them entirely. Dogs belong at the feast, as much a part of the spectacle as minstrels or jesters. In noble courts, certain dogs gain special favour, kept not only as hunters, but as companions. Small lapdogs, fluffy and delicate, are bred to warm the laps of ladies, or to rest upon their pillows at night. These too appear at table, perched upon benches beside their mistresses, offered tidbits of roasted fowl or sweetmeats. Visitors might smile indulgently at the sight, for such little creatures serve no purpose in the hunt, yet they embody affection and status. To own a dog solely for companionship is a mark of wealth, a sign that one's household prospers enough to indulge in such luxuries. Imagine the scene of a feast in a great hall. The tables are lined with trenchers of bread, dishes of fish, and platters of game. Candles flicker, shadows dancing upon the stone walls. Beneath the benches, hounds circle, their eyes fixed on every morsel. When a bone is tossed, a scramble erupts, paws scraping on the rushes as dogs wrestle for their prize. Above, the lord laughs, tossing another scrap, while his lady gently feeds a small dog from her plate, its tiny teeth nibbling delicately at the meat. Servants weave among them, careful not to trip, while the air resounds with the mingled sounds of human feasting and canine hunger. The church, as with many habits, frowns upon the excess. Priests warn against feeding animals from the same table as humans, calling it wasteful and unseemly. Yet the habit endures, too deeply entwined with daily life to be erased by sermons. For dogs are not only animals, they are companions, guardians, and symbols of loyalty. To feed them is to honor their place, to acknowledge their bond with humans. Even kings are said to have dined with their hounds at their side, stroking their ears as they listened to their courtiers speak. And so, in the Middle Ages, dogs are not banished from the dining hall but welcomed, fed, and cherished. They are part of the noise, the warmth, the chaos of shared meals. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the snap of jaws catching a thrown bone, the low growl of a hound guarding its prize, the laughter of children sneaking scraps to their pets beneath the table. In that mingling of voices, human and animal together, you glimpse a world where meals are communal in the fullest sense, where no one, not even the dog, is left outside the circle of the feast. Amulets and charms everywhere. In the medieval world, where the night is dark and storms seem to carry spirits, where sickness comes without warning and fields fail for reasons no one can explain, people cling to small objects of comfort, amulets, charms, and talismans worn upon the body or kept in secret places. These little tokens, made of bone, stone, wood, or precious metal, are thought to guard against misfortune, to draw love, to protect from illness, or to shield against evil eyes. They are as common as prayer and as necessary as food, woven into every life. From the peasant who ties a sprig of rue to his belt, to the noblewoman who hides a jeweled reliquary beneath her gown, many charms are simple, drawn from the natural world. A wolf's tooth worn on a cord around the neck is said to grant courage. A piece of coral protects children from harm. Amber beads are believed to ease teething, while small pouches filled with herbs, sage, rosemary, or wormwood ward off sickness. Farmers carry stones with holes worn through them, called hagstones, tied above doors or hung in stables to protect livestock. Women slip sprigs of yarrow or vervain into their girdles, believing these plants ensure fertility and safe childbirth. Such objects are small, unremarkable to the eye, but to their owners, they are lifelines in a world of uncertainty. The Church views these practices uneasily. On the one hand, it encourages relics of saints' bones, cloth, or splinters of the true cross as holy protectors. Pilgrims travel miles to obtain them, wearing little lead badges stamped with sacred symbols, convinced that they carry divine power. On the other hand, the Church condemns charms not rooted in faith, branding them as superstition or even witchcraft. Yet people see little difference between a relic kissed at an altar and a pouch of herbs tied around the neck. Both bring comfort, both promise protection, both link the fragile human body to forces beyond itself. In towns, amulets are bought from apothecaries or wandering peddlers. A coin stamped with strange marks, a strip of parchment inscribed with holy words, a bead of glass said to be older than Rome, all are sold as guardians against evil. Mothers buy charms for their children, tucking them into clothing, certain that without them the child is exposed. Soldiers wear amulets into battle, pressing them against their lips before charging forward. Lovers exchange tokens, rings, carved wooden hearts, even knots of hair tied in silk, believing these bind affections as surely as any vow. Superstition reaches into every corner of life. To keep away nightmares, people hang charms above their beds, crosses, herbs, or tiny bells that jingle softly in the night. To ward off the evil eye, A mother spits gently on her child's forehead, muttering a protective phrase, then ties a red thread around the wrist. To guard crops from blight, farmers bury charms in the corners of their fields, whispering prayers to saints and spirits alike. A sailor wears a pouch of salt around his neck to keep the sea from swallowing him, while a shepherd ties a carved token to his staff to keep wolves at bay. Each charm is a bridge between fear and hope, a tangible answer to mysteries too great to explain. Imagine the chamber of a noblewoman preparing for a journey. Her maid brings her cloak, fastening it with a brooch that holds a fragment of cloth said to come from a saint's robe. Around her neck hangs a small reliquary, glittering with gold. Inside it, a sliver of bone. Beneath her gown, sewn secretly into the hem, lies a tiny pouch of herbs prepared by a midwife. She steps into the carriage, confident, believing herself wrapped in layers of unseen protection. In a village hut nearby, a farmer ties a stone with a hole through it to his daughter's bedpost, certain it will keep away sickness. Both noble and peasant, though separated by wealth, share the same quiet faith in the power of small things. The objects themselves often outlive their owners. Archaeologists find them buried in graves, placed upon the chests of the dead as final guardians. A string of beads, a carved bone charm, a scrap of parchment folded tightly, these tokens accompany souls into the earth, proof of their importance in life. For in a world where death is ever near, to hold such an object is to believe, even for a moment, that one has some measure of control. And so, amulets and charms fill the medieval world, scattered like seeds across every life. Some are holy, blessed by priests, kissed in cathedrals. Others are humble, gathered from fields or carved by hand. All are treasured, carried close, worn until worn out. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the weight of a charm against your chest, the smoothness of a stone in your palm, the faint scent of herbs hidden in a pouch. You hear the whisper of prayers spoken over them, the soft jingling of bells hung at a bed's head, the quiet sigh of reassurance as someone clasps their charm before sleep. Thus the tale ends, in the hush of faith and superstition intertwined, a world where little tokens hold great meaning, where people face darkness not with certainty but with hope carried in the simple strength of objects no larger than a hand.